The Perseverance was just another small ship drifting through the outer rim of the galaxy, where no one paid much attention. Its crew barely kept the lights on as they made their way from one obscure planet to the next, delivering whatever cargo they could find. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work. The ship itself wasn't much to look at either. Its hull was patched together with scavenged materials from the junkyards of 100 worlds. Its engines sputtered and groaned with every jump it made. But there was one thing no one could ever deny about the ship or its crew. They were survivors in a galaxy that cared nothing for survival. The crew consisted of 5 humans. None of them were particularly skilled in any one area, but they had learned to make do when the situation demanded it. The captain was a woman named Elena, tough as nails and quick-witted with a sharp tongue, but she always had a soft spot for her crew. She'd seen enough of the galaxy's horrors to know that loyalty was a rare and valuable thing. Her first officer was Jax, a former soldier who had seen too many wars and not enough peace. He never talked about his past, but his eyes told stories of battles fought and lost. He was the kind of man you wanted at your back when things went sideways. Next was Mira, the youngest of the group, barely out of her teens, but she was a technical genius. She could fix anything that broke, and she always had a way of making things work when no one else could. Then there was Finn, a communications expert who could talk his way out of almost any situation. And finally, there was Lyra, the ship's medic, who had a calming presence in the chaos of space. Her hands were always steady, and her words always comforting. Their latest assignment was supposed to be an easy one, a standard cargo delivery to a mining colony on the fringe of the galaxy. The job was simple, and the pay wasn't great, but it would keep them going for another few months. But as they approached the colony's location, something strange happened. Their navigation system started glitching, and the ship began to veer off course. At first, they thought it was just a technical issue, but then the distress signal came through a coded message from an unknown source. It was faint, but unmistakable. The signal was coming from a nearby sector known for being dangerous. No one went there, not unless they had to. But Elena wasn't the type to back down from a challenge, especially one that might involve helping someone in need. She decided to investigate the signal despite the crew's protests. As they made their way toward the source of the distress call, the crew could feel the tension building in the air. Something about this situation didn't feel right. The galaxy was full of danger and deception, and they had seen their fair share of both. But this was different. The closer they got, the more the ship seemed to vibrate, as if some unseen force was pulling them in. And when they finally arrived at the source of the signal, they found a small outpost hidden in an asteroid field. It was abandoned, or so it seemed. There was no sign of life, but the distress signal was still broadcasting from the station's comms tower. Elena ordered the crew to prepare for a possible rescue mission. As they docked with the station, the air inside was cold and stale, and the place felt eerily empty, as if something had been here, but left in a hurry. The crew split up to search for clues, unaware that their arrival had set something into motion, something far bigger than any of them could have imagined. As Elena and the crew explored the eerie outpost, they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The walls were lined with strange symbols and alien markings none of them could recognize. But the silence in the air was the most unsettling part. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, like something was watching them. But from the shadows of this forgotten place, they found nothing to explain the feeling. Their search led them deeper into the station's control room, where an old console flickered to life in front of them. Mira immediately moved to the controls and began working on the system, but the moment she powered it up, a new distress signal came through, louder and clearer than before. It wasn't just a simple message, it was a call for help from an alien race unknown to them. Elena's first instinct was to pull back, but something in the message caught her attention. The alien voice spoke of a looming threat, something far worse than anything they had ever encountered before, and it made no demands, just a simple plea for survival. The voice said they had been hiding from the Empire for years, and now their resources were running out. They were down to their last hope, and they were reaching out to anyone who would listen. Elena didn't hesitate. Her gut told her this was important. They couldn't ignore it, even if it was a trap or some kind of trick. She gave the order to track the signal to its source. Mira traced the signal to a nearby planet in an uncharted sector of space, but there was a catch. The planet was surrounded by a deadly nebula full of volatile gas pockets and electromagnetic disturbances. Even the best ships had trouble navigating through it. Elena wasn't concerned about the danger the crew had faced, far worse. But what did worry her was the idea that this unknown race was so desperate they were calling on anyone willing to risk everything to help them. She knew this was more than just a simple rescue mission. As they made their way toward the planet, the crew could feel the tension building with every passing moment. The nebula loomed ahead in the distance. Its swirling clouds of color and light were mesmerizing but dangerous. They couldn't rely on conventional navigation systems to get through. They would have to go by instinct and the skills they had honed over the years. Elena knew they would be tested, but they had no choice but to push forward. The Perseverance dove into the nebula's depths as the crew worked together to keep the ship on course. The air was thick with static, and the ship's instruments flickered in and out of functionality. Every now and then a massive burst of radiation would send the ship's shields into overdrive, but they pushed through the storm like a ship carved from stone, fighting against the elements of space itself. Then came the breakthrough. They broke through the other side of the nebula, and before them was a small green planet surrounded by an unassuming atmosphere. At first glance, it seemed like any other planet, but there was something in the air, something strange, that made it feel different. The distress signal had originated from here, and Elena had no doubt this was where they would find the answers they were looking for. The crew landed near an isolated settlement at the planet's edge. As they disembarked, they were greeted by a race of beings unlike any they had encountered before. Their skin was a shimmering blue with iridescent scales that glowed faintly in the dim light. Their eyes were large and wide with a look of intelligence and fear, but the most striking thing was their posture. They stood tall and regal, like they carried the weight of the world on their shoulders. The leader of the settlement approached Elena and her crew with a solemn expression. His voice was calm, but there was a desperation beneath it. He explained that they had been hiding from the Empire for years, and now their enemies were closing in on them. They needed help, and they needed it fast, or their race would be wiped out forever. The leader of the alien race, who introduced himself as Callan, led Elena and her crew into the heart of their settlement. The area was small but well organized, with buildings crafted from materials that seemed to blend perfectly with the natural surroundings. Despite the beauty of the place, there was an unmistakable air of fear that hung over everything. The people moved quickly, always looking over their shoulders as if expecting danger to arrive at any moment. Callan's eyes were filled with a mixture of gratitude and anxiety as he spoke to Elena. He explained that their species, the Vorelians, had once been a powerful and peaceful race, thriving on their advanced knowledge of energy manipulation. But a few decades ago, their empire had made enemies, powerful enemies, and they had been forced into hiding. The Vorelians had managed to stay under the radar of the galaxy's major powers for a long time, but recently the Empire's forces had found them. Their technology was no match for the Empire's fleets, and their resources were quickly running out. Elena listened intently, her mind racing. This wasn't just a plea for help. It was a call for survival. The Empire had been hunting these aliens for years, and now it seemed they were at the end of their rope. Callan's people had one final hope, the artifact that they had managed to protect for centuries. He wouldn't say much more about it, but the urgency in his voice was enough to tell Elena it was something important. They needed it to protect themselves from the Empire's wrath, and they believed the artifact could also hold the key to turning the tide in their favor. As Callan spoke, Elena's crew began to realize the full scope of the situation. Mira, who had been examining the technology around them, whispered to Jax that there was something strange about the Vorelians' energy systems. They were primitive by comparison to most galactic standards, but there was an underlying power to them, a hint of ancient technology that didn't seem entirely native to this world. Finn, who had been quiet up until now, glanced nervously at the sky. If the Empire finds out we're here, he trailed off, knowing the words didn't need to be said. The Empire wouldn't just destroy this settlement, they'd wipe out everything in their path. Elena met Callan's gaze, the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. The crew had never been in a situation like this before. They were a small cargo ship with outdated weapons, and yet here they were, standing on the edge of a war between the Vorelians and a galaxy-spanning empire. But despite the odds, Elena couldn't turn her back on them. If they didn't help, the Vorelians would be obliterated, and the galaxy would lose yet another peaceful species to the Empire's tyranny. "We'll help you," Elena said firmly. The crew exchanged glances, each of them silently acknowledging the gravity of the promise they had just made. "But we need more information. If we're going to fight the Empire, we'll need something more than just a few upgrades." Callan's face hardened with resolve. He led them deeper into the settlement, showing them a hidden underground chamber. Inside, they found what he had spoken of, a massive, glowing crystal, pulsing with energy. It was the artifact, and it was far more advanced than anything the crew had ever seen. The Vorelians had been protecting it for centuries, believing it was the key to their people's survival, but they had never fully understood its power. Now, with the Empire closing in, they were willing to risk everything to unlock its secrets. As Elena and her crew studied the crystal, they realized it held more than just ancient knowledge. It held the potential to change the balance of power in the galaxy. The artifact could be weaponized, and with it, the Perseverance could become the most dangerous ship in the galaxy. The crew began making plans, knowing that they were about to take on a threat unlike any they had faced before. They had a ship that barely survived the smallest skirmish, and now they were about to challenge one of the galaxy's most ruthless empires. But they were no longer just a weak human cargo ship. They were about to become a force that no one would ignore. The discovery of the artifact was only the beginning. The crew of the Perseverance had never faced a challenge like this before. As they carefully examined the glowing crystal, they could feel the weight of its potential. Mira was the first to touch it, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface. The moment she made contact, the ship's systems buzzed to life, and a surge of energy pulsed through the ship. It wasn't just a relic. It was a power source, one that seemed to respond to the ship's presence. Mira's eyes widened in realization. "Elena, this isn't just an artifact," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "It's alive. It's linked to the Perseverance somehow." Elena stood in front of the artifact, feeling its power resonate through the ship. This was more than just a weapon. It was a tool of unimaginable potential. The crystal hummed with energy, and the crew could sense that it was more than a simple object. It was a key to something much larger, something that could tip the balance of the entire galaxy. But the question remained, how could they use it? Callan, who had been standing quietly by, finally spoke. The artifact was created by an ancient race long before the Vorelians. It was said to be a source of boundless energy, capable of powering entire fleets or, if wielded correctly, destroying them. He paused, his face grim. "It's why the Empire has been hunting us. They believe that if they can control it, they will rule the galaxy." Elena looked around at her crew. They weren't fighters. They weren't soldiers. But they had something more important: the will to protect the innocent and the determination to fight against overwhelming odds. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing up to tyranny and giving those who couldn't defend themselves a chance to be free. "We'll need to unlock its full potential," Elena said, her voice firm. "If we're going to fight the Empire, we need to know how to use this power. But we can't do it alone." Mira had already begun studying the artifact's interface, trying to decipher its ancient language. It was a complex puzzle, and each piece revealed something more incredible than the last. The artifact, it seemed, wasn't just a power source. It had the ability to interface directly with the Perseverance's systems, giving the ship enhanced capabilities. The more they understood about it, the more they realized that this wasn't just a matter of upgrading their weapons. It was about transforming the Perseverance into something far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Days passed as the crew worked around the clock, learning and adapting. They pored over the ancient data stored within the artifact, carefully integrating its technology into the Perseverance's systems. It was slow progress, but every time they made a breakthrough, the ship became more powerful. New weapon systems were unlocked, and their shields were reinforced with energy fields that could absorb and redirect attacks. Their engines, once outdated and unreliable, were now capable of warp speeds that outstripped the fastest ships in the galaxy. In the meantime, Callan's people were preparing for the worst. The Empire had sent scouts into the sector, and it was only a matter of time before they discovered the Vorelian settlement. The crew knew they had to act fast. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. When everything was ready, Alina gathered the crew for a final briefing. "This is it. We've transformed the Perseverance into a weapon, but it's still a small ship in a vast galaxy. We're going to have to be smarter than our enemies. We'll use the artifact's power to strike when they least expect it. We're not just going to fight. We're going to take the fight to them." The crew stood together, each of them silently acknowledging the risks they were about to take. They had no illusions about what lay ahead. The Empire was coming, and they were about to become the galaxy's most dangerous wild card. Alina looked at her crew one last time. "We may be small, but we got something no one else has. The will to fight. And that's more powerful than any fleet." The weeks that followed were a blur of activity as the crew of the Perseverance worked tirelessly to harness the artifact's power. Every system on the ship was being revamped, and with each new modification, the crew felt the balance of power shifting. No longer were they simply running from danger. They were preparing to fight back. The crew was learning to use the artifact's power not just to enhance the ship's capabilities, but to turn the tide in their favor against the Empire. Mira had become obsessed with the artifact, poring over every detail of its interface. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that the artifact was far more sophisticated than they had originally thought. It wasn't just a power source, it was a map, a guide to ancient knowledge that had been lost to time. It held the potential to unlock weapons, shields, and even new technologies the galaxy had never seen before. But as they delved deeper into the secrets within, the crew began to realize something even more profound. The artifact was not just a weapon. It was a force that could reshape the galaxy. The Vorelian settlement had become a hub of activity, and the crew had made an agreement to help defend it in exchange for the knowledge contained within the artifact. Callan and his people were grateful, but Alina could sense the anxiety in their eyes. They knew the Empire was coming, and they were afraid it would be too late to escape. But Alina couldn't afford to think like that. The Perseverance was no longer just a ship. It was a weapon that could stand against the Empire. One day, as the crew was finalizing their preparations, a transmission came through. It was an encrypted message from an old ally, a pirate captain who had once crossed paths with the crew in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. His name was Ryle, and he had a reputation for knowing things no one else did. His message was simple. The Empire knew about the Perseverance, and they were preparing a massive fleet to destroy it. They were coming, and they were coming fast. Alina's pulse quickened as she absorbed the news. They didn't have time to waste. The Empire's fleet would be arriving within a few days, and there was no chance they would be able to outrun them. The crew knew it was time to make their move. "We'll need to get the Vorelians out of here and make sure they're safe," Alina said, her mind racing with strategy. "We can't fight a fleet head-on, but we can use what we've learned from the artifact. If we hit them fast, hit them hard, and make sure they don't know what's coming, we can turn the tide." Callan, who had been listening intently, nodded. "We'll help you. Our people are ready to fight. We've been waiting for this day for too long." The crew quickly formulated a plan. They would need to divide their forces. Alina and her team would use the Perseverance's new abilities to strike at the heart of the Empire's fleet. Meanwhile, the Vorelians would assist in coordinating a defense for their settlement and ensure that any survivors were evacuated to a safe location. As the day of battle approached, the atmosphere on the Perseverance was tense. They had no idea how many ships the Empire was sending, but they knew it would be a fight for survival. The odds were still heavily against them, but they were no longer afraid. The crew had something they hadn't had before, the power to stand up to the Empire. The final night before the battle, Alina stood on the bridge of the Perseverance, looking out at the stars. It was a quiet moment, but beneath it was the weight of everything they had fought for. They weren't just a ragtag crew anymore. They were a force to be reckoned with. They were no longer weak. They were no longer powerless. Tomorrow, they would take the fight to the Empire, and no one would underestimate the Perseverance again. The day of battle arrived sooner than expected. The crew of the Perseverance was on high alert, every member preparing for the fight of their lives. The ship's systems had been upgraded to their fullest potential, and while they were still outnumbered, Alina knew that the power of the artifact was their greatest advantage. They weren't just going to fight the Empire. They were going to hit them where they least expected. Alina stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the vast expanse of space ahead. The stars looked peaceful, distant, as if the galaxy had no idea what was about to unfold. But she knew better. The Empire's fleet was on its way, and they wouldn't hesitate to destroy anything in their path. They would stop at nothing to eliminate the Vorelians and anyone who dared to stand in their way. "We have no time to waste," Alina said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. "We'll take the first strike. The Vorelians will create a diversion to draw their forces toward the settlement. We'll hit their fleet from the rear, disrupt their command ship, and take them down one by one." Jax and Mira were already at their stations, ready to implement the plan. Finn was on comms, keeping an ear out for any incoming messages from their allies. Lyra, who had been working with the Vorelian medics to prepare for casualties, gave Alina a brief nod. They were all ready. As the Perseverance made its way toward the enemy fleet, the tension among the crew was palpable. Each member knew that this mission could mean the end of everything. If they failed, the Vorelians would be wiped out, and their own ship would be little more than a footnote in the Empire's history. But if they succeeded, it would send a message that no one, not even the Empire, could ignore. The first wave of the Empire's fleet came into view. A massive armada of warships, sleek and imposing. Alina's heart raced as she watched the fleet grow larger on the radar. They were outnumbered 10-1, and yet they had something the Empire didn't: surprise. With the power of the artifact at their disposal, they could turn the tide. But they had to be smart. They had to be fast. "Engage the cloaking system," Alina ordered. "Stay close to the nebula. We'll use it to our advantage." Mira's fingers flew across the console as she activated the cloaking field, rendering the Perseverance nearly invisible to the enemy sensors. The ship became a ghost, slipping silently through the enemy fleet. Alina watched the enemy ships pass by, unaware of the threat that was lurking in their midst. They were close now. The time to strike was nearly upon them. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the enemy's rear flank. The diversion was underway. The Vorelian forces had launched their assault, drawing the Empire's attention away from the Perseverance. Alina's heart skipped a beat. It was their moment. "Now," Alina shouted. Mira powered up the ship's weapons, and the Perseverance surged forward, cloaking device still active. In one swift motion, they appeared out of nowhere, directly behind a command ship of the Empire's fleet. The surprise was complete. The crew unleashed everything they had, firing the newly upgraded energy weapons with devastating precision. The first few shots tore through the command ship's shields, leaving it vulnerable. The Empire fleet scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The artifact had given the Perseverance an edge no one could have predicted. Alina watched as the enemy ships fell one by one, their defenses unable to cope with the relentless barrage. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to change the course of history. "Keep the pressure on them," Alina barked as they cut through the enemy forces. "We're not stopping until we've crippled their fleet." The crew fought with everything they had: pushing themselves beyond their limits. But just as victory seemed within their grasp, a shadow loomed on the horizon. A massive warship, the flagship of the Empire, appeared from behind the debris field. Its guns were charged, and its shields were nearly impenetrable. "We need a way through that shield," Elena called out, her mind racing for a solution. Mira's voice crackled through the comms. "There's a weak spot in their shields, near the aft. If we hit it just right, we can disable them." "Set a course," Elena shouted, her grip tightening on the controls. The Perseverance veered sharply, dodging enemy fire as they lined up their shot. This was it, their final chance. The Perseverance maneuvered quickly through the debris, the Empire's flagship now dead ahead. Elena's heart raced as she steered the ship into position, knowing that this was their one shot. The massive warship was heavily armored, but Mira's analysis had shown a weak point, a small gap in the shield just behind the engines. If they hit it right, they could disable the flagship and throw the entire Empire fleet into disarray. "Lock onto the target," Elena said, her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. She trusted her crew. They had fought together through thick and thin, and now, in the heat of battle, they were more united than ever. Mira's fingers danced across the console, coordinating with the ship's weapon systems. "Target locked," she said. "We've got one chance to make this count." The crew braced themselves as Elena made a final course correction, aligning the Perseverance perfectly with the weak spot in the flagship's shield. The ship's weapons hummed with energy, ready to fire. Elena took a deep breath, her hands steady on the controls. They couldn't afford to hesitate now. "Firing," Mira called out, and the ship's primary weapons unleashed a devastating blast. The energy beam shot forward, hitting the weak spot with pinpoint accuracy. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, with a deafening explosion, the Empire's flagship trembled and shuddered as its shields flickered and collapsed. The blast had done its job. The ship was now vulnerable. "Yes," Jax shouted from the weapons console. "They're wide open." But their victory was short-lived. The flagship's remaining defenses immediately retaliated, and a barrage of energy blasts lit up the space around the Perseverance. Elena swerved the ship, narrowly avoiding the incoming fire. The flagship, though crippled, wasn't done yet. Its remaining guns fired relentlessly, forcing Elena to weave and dodge through the assault. "We've got to finish this now," Elena said, grit in her voice. "Mira, another shot. Aim for the engines." Mira didn't hesitate. She adjusted the targeting systems, recharging their weapons for another blast. But as she did, an alarm blared across the bridge. "Incoming reinforcements," Finn called out from the communication station. More ships, coming in fast from the far side. The enemy fleet had regrouped, and now they were pouring in, eager to avenge their flagship. The Perseverance was outnumbered, and with every passing second, their chances of survival grew slimmer. Yet, despite the odds, Elena didn't falter. The crew had come too far to turn back now. They had the artifact's power, and they had the will to fight. "Focus on the engines," Elena ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "If we can disable that flagship, the rest of the fleet will crumble." Mira took aim again, her eyes narrowing in concentration. The Perseverance's weapons hummed to life, charged and ready. Elena felt the tension building in the air. The crew's every breath was synchronized, their focus locked on the task ahead. With a single decisive blast, the Perseverance fired once more. The energy beam tore through the void, crashing into the flagship's engines. The explosion that followed was massive, lighting up the blackness of space like a supernova. For a moment, the flagship remained suspended, its crippled form hanging in the void. Then, with a final burst of energy, it shattered into pieces, breaking apart under the force of the blast. The Empire's fleet faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks. Without their flagship, their coordination collapsed. The Perseverance had delivered a crippling blow. Elena didn't wait to see the fallout. She knew they had to keep pushing. "All units, engage," Alina shouted. "This is our moment. Let's make it count." The crew, fueled by adrenaline and the power of the artifact, pressed forward, fighting with a newfound ferocity. The Empire fleet, disorganized and reeling from the loss of their flagship, was now on the defensive. The Perseverance moved through the battlefield like a storm, picking off enemy ships one by one. For the first time, the crew of the Perseverance wasn't just fighting for survival. They were winning. The Empire's fleet was in disarray, and the Perseverance was leading the charge. The crew had proven their worth, their resolve stronger than ever. Alina could feel the weight of the battle shifting in their favor, but she knew the fight wasn't over. The Empire would regroup, and they would send everything they had left to crush them. But for now, the Perseverance had given the Empire a taste of what it had been underestimating: the power of determination, unity, and the unknown. "Keep the pressure on," Alina commanded, her voice calm but urgent. "We've made our mark. Let's make sure they don't get back up." Mira worked quickly, analyzing enemy ship movements and recalibrating their weapons. "We've got them scattered. They're trying to form up again, but they're taking too many hits. We can push them back for good." The crew, focused and energized, moved with precision. Jax and Finn took down enemy ships with expert fire, each blast more effective than the last. Lyra coordinated with the Vorelian forces, ensuring that their fighters held their ground and provided cover when needed. The Vorelians had proven themselves a crucial part of the battle, offering support at the right moments to tip the scale in their favor. But despite their victory, the crew was aware of the looming threat. The Empire's retaliation would come soon, and this time, it could be the last stand. Alina had to make sure that the Perseverance wasn't just fighting to win a battle, they were fighting to change everything. She couldn't allow the Empire to regroup and launch another attack. It had to end now. "Incoming," Finn warned, his voice tight. "Big ship, large energy signature." Alina turned to the screen, her eyes narrowing. A massive dreadnought appeared on the edge of the battlefield. This was no ordinary ship. It was one of the Empire's most formidable warships. It was armed to the teeth, with shields strong enough to withstand almost anything. And it was headed straight for them. "We don't have much time," Alina said, assessing their options. "We'll need to use the artifact's full power to even stand a chance." Mira nodded. "I'm ready. We've integrated the artifact into the ship, but I've been holding back. If we push it, we can tap into the full potential." The dreadnought's guns lit up, and massive energy beams shot toward the Perseverance. Alina's reflexes kicked in, and she steered the ship sharply, narrowly avoiding the blasts. But they wouldn't be able to dodge forever. They had to finish this fight. "Do it," Alina said, her voice filled with urgency. Mira activated the artifact's full power, channeling its energy into the ship's systems. The entire vessel seemed to hum with newfound strength. The engines roared, and the weapons fired with unprecedented intensity. The artifact's energy coursed through the Perseverance, making it stronger, faster, and deadlier than ever before. The ship surged forward, its weapons unleashing a barrage of energy blasts that tore through the dreadnought's shields. The enemy warship retaliated, but the power of the artifact kept the Perseverance one step ahead. Alina pushed the ship to its limits, knowing they couldn't afford to fail. With a final powerful shot, the artifact's energy overloaded the dreadnought's defenses. The ship exploded in a brilliant burst of light, its shattered remains drifting through space. The enemy fleet faltered once again, the shock of their flagship's destruction too much to overcome. The remaining ships turned and fled, retreating in disarray. The battlefield fell silent. The Empire had been dealt a blow they couldn't recover from. The Perseverance had proven that the smallest, most underestimated ship could bring even the greatest of empires to its knees. Alina stood on the bridge, watching as the remaining enemy ships scattered. She turned to her crew, her voice filled with pride and relief. "We did it." The crew let out a collective cheer, their exhaustion and relief washing over them in waves. They had defied the odds. They had fought for the Forellians, for their freedom, and for the future of the galaxy. They had proven that even the weakest human ship could become the most fearsome force in the galaxy when driven by the right people. Now, Elena said, her gaze turning to the stars once more, let's make sure the galaxy knows who we are. The Empire won't forget the Perseverance anytime soon. And with that, the crew set course for the unknown, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. They weren't just survivors. They were now the ones everyone would have to reckon with.